Thank you, Rachel and JP, for that wonderful musical introduction. I think many of us have heard the following words repeated often: those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Today, we're going to talk about some unpleasant parts of our history, some intentionally designed to segregate and benefit certain communities at the expense of others. The students of IntegrateNYC will have the floor today. Our wonderful community partners. But before that happens, I want to introduce this work by highlighting the pernicious impact of racist planning policies, such as redlining, which we will learn more about today, and their long-lasting impact on our cities and towns. When academic institutions don't have culturally sensitive curricula, both in public schools and institutions of higher education, and when the people that make decisions about our cities and places don't reflect the communities they impact, we set ourselves up to repeat some of the detrimental mistakes of the past. In the US, only 5% of urban planners and 3% of architects are POCs. I myself belong to both groups. At this rate, it would take the professions roughly 240 years to reflect the diversity of America, and our communities simply can't afford to wait. This is why I founded Territorial Empathy, a nonprofit design collective that brings intersectional and multidisciplinary urbanist architects, data scientists, data journalists, and technologists to study the issues affecting people in places often overlooked. The project you're about to see today, Segregation is Killing Us, is unique in that, at least internally, it's mostly led by women and professionals from richly diverse backgrounds, some native New Yorkers, some folks from as far as Ghana, Colombia, Mexico, and Bangladesh. Most of them volunteers who believe that the inequities that you will learn about today can no longer continue. I would sincerely like to thank them for their labor of love, expertise, and effort. And with that, I will turn it over to our colleague Cecilia to introduce herself. Thank you very much.
My name is Cecilia. I'm an architect from Mexico City, currently based in New York City, and volunteer for Territorial Empathy.
And I'm Victoria. I'm another volunteer for Territorial Empathy. I'm an architectural and urban designer based here in New York. And now I'll pass it over to Leanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne Nunes. I'm the Executive High School Director of IntegrateNYC. I go by she, they pronouns. And IntegrateNYC, if you don't know, is a youth-led integration organization whose main goal is to ensure that there's equity and justice in all of New York City's public schools. For the past few years, we've been really trying to look at how we can make the city and the city schools reflect the diversity of the city. Right? How can we make the city schools less segregated? What we're about to present to you today is the research, the data, the labor, and one of the solutions to the problems that we're trying to find to fix that. So I'm going to pass it to the rest of the team to introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, my name is Abhishek Majumdar, he, him pronouns, and I'm a lead at IntegrateNYC.
Hi everyone, my name is Danielle Johnson. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm also a lead at IntegrateNYC.
Hello, my name is Emma Rayhack. I am a youth director at IntegrateNYC, and my pronouns are her, she.
Hi, my name is Faria Hussein. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am also a lead at Integrate.
Hi everyone, my name is Jesus Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a lead at IntegrateNYC.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Narvaez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also a lead at IntegrateNYC.
Hey everybody, my name is Matt Gonzalez. I use he, him pronouns. I am the policy coach for IntegrateNYC and director of the Integration and Innovation Initiative at the NYU Metro Center.
Hello everyone, my name is Naya Berg. My pronouns are she, her, and I also work as a policy coach at IntegrateNYC, and I am the Integrated Schools Project Director at New York Appleseed.
Hi everyone, my name is Shakira Mustafa. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a lead at IntegrateNYC.
Hi everyone, Zaps, she, her, hers. I'm the adult executive director at IntegrateNYC.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So you all just heard a little snippet from each of the members of our small team who were working together on this admission problem. And before we jump in to the meat, to the juice that we've prepared for you all, I just want to take a moment to ground us. Just take a moment to ground us in the reality that we're all struggling to navigate. So although the focus of this event is to discuss admission policy changes, we have to acknowledge the devastating tragedy that has opened this policy window in the first place, right? To date, the United States has lost almost 150,000 lives due to COVID-19, and that's in our country alone. We've suffered innumerable losses since the beginning of this pandemic. And I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that everybody is somebody's everything. Every life has meaning, has purpose. Everyone that we have lost was someone's best friend, child, partner, parent, cousin, acquaintance, right? And so I want us to pause for the cause and take a moment. If you've lost anyone due to COVID, please drop their name in the chat so we can uplift their name, uplift their lives. And we're going to take a moment of silence. Thank you. You can continue to share those names and we'll continue to hold their lives as we move forward into the event. I'm going to turn it over to Jesus, who's going to start us off with the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Rachel. I want us to start this event by doing a land acknowledgement. While many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants from those who were forcefully brought to the States, we must respect and recognize that this land, the land that New York City continues to occupy, is our Muncie Lenape land. We are here today because this land was forcefully taken away from them and continues to be occupied. And acknowledging that the space occupies colonized indigenous land, we share a collective responsibility to honor, protect, and sustain this land. We offer gratitude, humility, and respect to the Muncie Lenape, whose land we are on which we are visitors. Now we are going to the historical framing of this conversation. The history and the development of the establishment of the United States was and continues to be a direct result of racial violence, forced labor of Black lives, and imperial claims of conquest overseas. This nation continues to thrive on white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, the genocide and continuous neglect of indigenous people, racial capitalism, systematic racism, and denial of ascriptions to full humanness. The beginning of this country begins in the attempted genocide of indigenous people and the beginning of the slavery to build this country. In 1619, enslaved Africans replaced the enslavement of indigenous people after they experienced attempted genocide. The existence of the United States was and continues to be rooted in slavery and systematic denial of full humanness for Black lives. Slavery was an economic system to serve the establishment purposes and to develop this country on a foundation of racist and oppressive practices among Black lives for the purpose of prosperity of white supremacists, heteropatriarchy, and racial capitalism ideologies. In 1865, on December 18th, the 13th Amendment was passed, which stated that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States. It was here that marked a new era of systematic racist practices and policies that impacted Black lives and continues to do so among them and historically marginalized communities, which leads us to redlining, a method that real estate and mortgage lenders used that grouped Black communities as well as historically marginalized communities that categorize them as high risk to mortgage lenders. And now I'll pass it on to Danielle to speak more on redlining and the impact it had and continues to have. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Danielle. I think that it's important that if we're going to talk about how exactly we're going to fix the oppressive systems of our country, it's important to talk about the root of the problem, which is redlining. So in the 1930s, FDR had the responsibility of trying to rescue the American people from its declining economy due to the Great Depression. Thus, he created the National Housing Act. This created the 30-year mortgage with affordable down payments and low interest rates, which is a housing system that many of us know and still use today. This was a way to increase economic spending in order to boost the economy out of such a hard time, right? So with this act, he created the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which is also known as the HOLC. So the HOLC created what is known as residential security maps, which were color-coded maps designed for banks to use when giving out loans to people for houses. Those that lived in the green, blue, and yellow parts were the safest people to give loans to, and those were in the red parts were deemed hazardous for lending. People that lived in these red-lined areas were primarily people of color, as well as immigrants and impoverished people. So with these hazardous areas, it's important to talk about the environmental injustice that happens in primarily non-white and impoverished communities. These red-lined areas were often in short distances to factories, which polluted the air and reduced air quality greatly. Places with higher air pollution often have increased asthma hospitalization rates as well. In addition, redlining affects surrounding property values, which shows a clear disparity in the amount of wealth. Surrounding property values are the primary source of school funding around the country. Houses placed in safe zones, as they were called, had increased property values, which meant that they had better funded schools and therefore better performing schools. And I will pass it over to Leanne.
So, can everyone hear me? We're good? Yes, yeah. Okay. So, the lovely Danielle has just explained some of the history of redlining. And I'm sure that if you live in New York City or know anything about home ownership in the city, then you'd know that home ownership isn't exactly as attainable here as in other places across the country. But redlining persists despite that fact. So real quick, I'm just going to put some of redlining into the context of New York City and our schools. To start, about 67% of New York City is made up of renters. And this is connected to the role historic redlining has played in reducing the ability of Black and Latinx communities from creating generational wealth. How the housing market relates to schooling is that each student has a price tag. Any student that walks into a school building has a cost and a number attached to their attendance. In areas like this median income map shows, where we have hoarded wealth and privilege, these areas navigate quote unquote good schools, creating an influx of demand. Families that are looking to settle in the city are going to be looking for areas with quote unquote good schools. So this influx of demand maintains the hoarding of privilege, which perpetuates the cycle of bubbled higher income communities. This map that shows the overcapacity of schools shows that schools in wealthier, wider neighborhoods are over capacity because of that influx of demand and are therefore receiving more fair student funding, the largest portion of most school budgets. In more traditional redlining in other parts of the country, school funding would come from property taxes, but because most of the city comes from renting, fair student funding is how we fund our schools most of the time. Schools that are in poor communities of color are under capacity and receive less fair student funding that they should be receiving for students that need it the most. We also see that under capacity schools, shown on this map, have more police presence and are targeting children of color and their families. Redlining is not just about property. It's also property or poverty. It's also about building and feeding a cycle of over-policing in our communities of color that has led to some of the devastating issues that are continuing to happen to this day. So I'm going to pass it on to Emma and Abhishek that are going to be talking about how segregation is killing us and some of the impacts that COVID-19 has had directly on New York City.
Thank you so much. I'm Emma. So the redlining that Leanne had spoke about has led to generations of segregation and the marginalization of low-income communities and communities of color. So we've started looking at data that was showing the impact of COVID-19 by race, and we have seen that segregation is killing us. So you can see the diagram from the screen share, the diamond shape, and the center of this graph represents the value of 0. And so the further a point is from the center, the higher the value. So this graph is telling us the disparities in the infection rate, hospitalization rate, and death rate of COVID-19 among different races within New York City. And so many people have been calling COVID-19 as this great equalizer, a virus that doesn't discriminate. But looking at this data, we've seen that racism is in fact a pre-existing health condition. This data shows that low-income communities and communities of color have been hit much harder than white communities, wealthy communities, and communities with privilege. And so when compared to white New Yorkers, Black and Latinx New Yorkers are actually 1.5 times more likely to be infected by COVID-19 and twice as likely to die from the virus. These are incredible statistics that I think really reflect how the disparities within COVID-19 and how these histories of redlining and systemic racism have impacted us, our health and how we live and who lives in this pandemic. So COVID-19 has really exacerbated many existing inequities. It's a pandemic that reinforces incredibly deep-rooted inequities that have been based on race and income. And so I want to pass it to Abhishek, who's going to be taking you through an animation that visualizes how wealth is directly correlated to the ability to social distance.
Yeah, so my name is Abhishek, and we know that health is a privilege when you can't quarantine. During the time of COVID-19, our essential workers of color were the ones who sustained the city and are still sustaining the city today. The neighborhoods that saw significant flight are 68% white, 55% made over $100,000, and 29% made over $200,000. And the median rent of their empty homes is $2,223 per month. Having the privilege to be anywhere subsequently brought COVID to different places and contributed to the spread of COVID throughout the country. To visualize the impact of COVID-19 in a more simplified way, we're going to watch a video showing if 30 New Yorkers had coronavirus.
Were 30 people. 26 people would be people of color. 8 people would be over 65 years old. 13 people would live in high poverty neighborhoods. And 4 people would have died in phase 1.
Now, Territorial Empathy has developed interactive maps where you can search a specific zip code and see how COVID has impacted that neighborhood. To see how that works, Faria and Sakira will take us through it.
Hi everyone, my name is Sakira Mustafa and I'm joined with Faria, and we'll be showing you how to interact with the Segregation is Killing Us website. So I'm sure you have all been seeing this beautiful website behind us, and you're probably wondering, how can you interact with it at home? So our partners, Territorial Empathy, curated a map to better understand the alarming discrepancies affecting New Yorkers of color. An analysis of all phase 1 COVID-19 cases and deaths can be seen on this map on the screen. The following map visualizes the casualties by each zip code, New York City health reported COVID-19 data regions, and predominant race and income.
So Sakira and I will be demonstrating how you can find how COVID has affected where you live, cases and deaths by race, as well as cases and deaths by income. The map under the hardest hit communities of color can be used to see how COVID has affected your own community. And as you can see on the top, there is a search bar on the top left corner. So you can type in your address or your zip code. So my zip code is 10462. So I live in Parkchester here in the Bronx. So you could see that red dot and my neighborhood's name, Parkchester. And as you can see in the data shown, it shows that where I live, there were 2,264 cases with a total of 164 deaths. And it is also important to note that this data is from phase 1, so the numbers now are much, much greater. And on the left, you could see the 4 categories. We have cases by race, deaths by race, cases by income, and deaths by income. So you could click any of them, and we're gonna start off with cases by race. And you could see where I live, there are predominantly much more cases with Hispanic identifying people, and them being predominantly the deaths by race as well, after you click deaths by race. And the little menu on the bottom left corner also shows everything clearly for you, so you can use it at home as well. And now Sakira will be showing us her neighborhood.
Yes, so I live in Jamaica, Queens, Jamaica, New York, 11432. So after you type that in, you can interact with the website. And after I type in my neighborhood, I can see that my the COVID cases in my neighborhood, the COVID case rate, as well as the COVID deaths. So there has been a total of 277 COVID deaths, and the death rate is astronomical. So this is definitely phase 1 data, as Faria said. So we know that as time goes on, that number is steadily increasing. So you can also see to the left of the screen the cases by race, the deaths by race, the cases by income, as well as the deaths by income. So if I was to click deaths by income, I can see that that number is around 2,867,000. And this is only phase 1 data. So we really want to stress that, because this website really allows you to see how these numbers are increasing steadily, and how this is a really serious situation, and you can engage with it and even see from your own neighborhood. So thank you all for tuning in with us, and please feel free to use these maps to learn more about your own communities. And now I'll be passing it over to Carla to tell us a little bit about the new school admission.
Hi everyone, I'm Carla, and IntegrateNYC has been advocating to redesign the high school admissions algorithm since about 2015 to 2016. It all started when Heba Jamal and Elijah Fox took a coding class to launch our really early algorithm work, and they partnered with Data for Black Lives in Bleecker Street. Then Yana Kalmika and Arnell Johnson ran algorithm hackathon to further develop the prototype. We also had a Retire Segregation event last year that celebrated 55 years since Brown versus Board of Ed. And we basically went around to different schools and handed out our own newspaper that explained our 5 R's and what IntegrateNYC has been doing to further integrate our schools. Now, screens are exclusionary practices that have been done by schools to discriminate against students of color and low-income students. Those include portfolios, interviews, tests, a look at past attendance, grades, and behaviors. These screens have been used to keep us segregated with students of color in schools that tend to be less resourced and under capacity, while the majority of white wealthy students at our are at more resource schools that are at overcapacity. And because of COVID-19, the city has been unable to operate these screens as they have in the past. We do not have state test scores, attendance, behavior, and all the other data that has led to the exclusion of low-income Black and Latinx students. And we're going to show you quickly a short video that describes the process of screens and segregation in our schools.
These are the students of New York City public schools. There are 1.1 million of them. They are racially diverse, economically diverse.
Hi.
Hola.
Ning hao. Bonjour. Namaskar.
They speak hundreds of different languages, come from different countries, and lead different lives. Every year, 8th graders go through the high school admissions process to discover which school they will attend in the fall. Like this school here. It looks like it has a lot of opportunities. A swimming pool, a baseball field, advanced classes. There's so much. Wouldn't you think a lot of kids would want to go there? Well, yes. A lot of students do want to attend, but decisions are based on screens. They can't just walk in there. This school screen is that it accepts students who can afford to in their middle and then school.
Mine's 54 to 60. So yeah, we can report back.
That's everyone. Hopefully the next school will be a bit more attainable for you. Here's the next school coming up ahead. And look, no screens. There may not be a field, pool, or that many advanced classes, but in this one, the teachers are amazing and the cafeteria has windows.
Those seats are going to fill up quickly.
Quickly, everyone, back on the admissions bus. We still have some great students looking to learn. Where will they go? This is our last school.
Driver, is this a school? It is? Okay.
Let's take a look at all the students we enrolled along our journey. These screens select, sort, and separate us. And not just in high school. There are middle school screens that select, sort, and separate 10-year-olds and make New York City one of the most segregated school systems in our country. These screens make it easier for students of privilege to access more resources. The students who are screened out are often low-income students and students of color, the same students who are feeling the most impact from COVID-19 right now. But students from these schools across the city have been joining together to form and mobilize a movement for real integration and real youth power. Where integration isn't about movement of bodies, but movement of minds. We are those students. In 2020, 66 years after Brown v. Board of Ed, our schools are still segregated. We can change that. Join us in calling for an end to discriminatory screens.
Our future is integrated.
Ojo, Waju, Odara.
Unsere Zukunft ist integriert.
Our future is integrated.
Thank you. That video just goes to show that segregation was intentional, so integration has to also be intentional. We are so excited to share our proposal to meaningfully integrate our schools, and I'm going to pass it on to Sakira to talk to you guys more about our new policy.
Thank you so much, Carla, for taking us through segregation in schools and showing us that beautiful video. Now, Abhishek and I will be presenting to you all our new admissions impact score. The same communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID are the same communities who have been most negatively impacted by the current admissions process.
So we are proposing an alternative means of prioritizing children in the hardest hit communities to break cyclical racism.
The admissions impact score showcases what affected families the most during quarantine: COVID deaths, lack of insurance, linguistic isolation, poverty, multi-generational housing, lack of computer access for online learning, and so much more.
These categories that Sakira just mentioned are categories that we are planning to weight in our new proposal along with individual student considerations like free reduced lunch and English language learners. We have an admissions priority map that compiles all this data and sees where the hardest hit areas are. The darkest colors are the hardest hit areas. Throughout this map, areas are ranged from priorities of 3 to 1, 3 being lowest priority and 1 being highest priority. These are determined by the weights that we have above of those categories along with the COVID-19 data. Living in these areas can provide a boost on your application priority on top of individual student considerations like free reduced lunch and English language learners. Sakira and I will go through some examples of hypothetical scenarios of students to show how that can work.
Precisely. So I want us to go through our first hypothetical and imagine a student from Harlem. So this student gets a 3 points because they have their neighborhood priority score will be a 3 as a student from Harlem. However, they won't get any add-ons if they don't qualify for free or reduced lunch, temporary housing, multilingual learner, student with disability, or anything else. So if they don't qualify for any of these categories, then they don't get any additional points added on to their impact score. So their final priority impact score will start off as a 3 and end as a 3.
Unlike the student from Harlem, if we take, for instance, the student in Bushwick who has a neighborhood score of 2, we also see that they qualify for free reduced lunch and they are also a student with disability. Because they apply for those categories, their rank will now be boosted. We see that free reduced lunch and student with disability each add an additional 1 to your priority score. So going from a 2 score, they'll go to the highest priority at 1.
Precisely. And we want to remember that this idea is not fully fleshed out, and we want to be inclusive. That's why we're having this meeting. We want to make sure that we're inclusive and that this is open to multiple perspectives and multiple perspectives are considered. Our goal is to make sure that the students who need a priority get it. So real equity is possible.
We know that this is such an important thing because COVID-19 exposed the embedded racism in the system. And that's why we plan to have this policy, not just for this time of COVID-19, but continue it and build on this plan and make it better.
Precisely. And the policy is meant to counteract the disadvantage that has been placed on these communities for so long. We want to remember that these are practices that have been compounded by COVID-19, but have been here for long before. And now I will pass it over to Jesus to tell us a little bit more about our call to action.
Thank you, Sakira. Thank you, Abhishek. In order for us to bring about a true integrated educational system, we need policies like these to be passed. We are no longer accepting segregation in our schools. We need you all to sign up on the dashboard to be a comrade and to give us feedback on this policy. We need you all to share this information back in your communities, in your school, and on your social. We are the youth movement and we all have a role to play. We are tired of schools being segregated, tired of being underfunded, tired of being the last accepted and the first rejected. And it is evident that the DOE doesn't give a damn and doesn't do crap to confront the segregation that occurs in our schools. It's our schools, not theirs. We have the power and we demand an end to segregation in our schools. And the fight for true equal opportunity in our public school systems in this damn city does not stop here. It does not stop with a single policy to bring equity and admissions. Now, the youth-led movement, the student-led revolution does not end in a single policy. There is much more to strive for in our schools. We'll be happy, we'll be content when we see ourselves in our classes. We'll be happy if we are actually given the money we need in our damn schools. We'll be happy if we were given the voice over the policies that impact us. We'll be happy if we could have equal opportunities to attend the schools we want. We'll be happy once we are the ones control over our schools and actions that impact us and our friends, our community, and our classmates. How hard Is it to simply have power over our education? We need to understand we all have power, and that this policy proposal created by Integrate NYC along with their comrades at Territorial Empathy is a first step to bring about a true integrated educational system. We all have a role to play, and we will dismantle this segregated, broken educational system as a movement, as a revolution. We need to understand that it takes all of us to do that and not just one person. We ask you all to do your role and to be a comrade in the student-led revolution. Power to the youth. Thank you very much.
I always have chills every time Jesus calls me to act. Every time I know I need to do something better, need to do more to support youth, like he said, so they can own their education. I do want to turn it to Zareth, again with Territorial Empathy, who's going to reiterate our admissions policy solution through a video.
All right, so before I introduce the video, the dashboard, linked you all to it. It's available and has more content than what we're showing because we do want to leave some room for questions. But before we kind of open it up to questions about the policy, we're just going to show a quick video that describes it, kind of showing everything again as a recap of what the students talked through. So we can just look at it one more time before we open it up for questions. Victoria?
Systemic inequalities that made COVID worse for some communities. Our proposal addresses identified variables that are based on hardships exacerbated by the pandemic. COVID score, household size, linguistic isolation, child poverty, lack of medical insurance, and computer access are all hardships that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Each of these variables was assigned a weight that reflects its urgency and magnitude. Delivering us a composite map that shows which communities lack the resources to bounce back from COVID. The resulting map has a corresponding priority score that uses the student's home address to determine the admissions priority based on community impact. Additionally, we consider individual student circumstances that may also increase the need for priority consideration in the admissions process. This way, both community impact and individual burdens are taken into consideration to allocate each student on a priority admission scale from 1 to 3 that best reflects its particular needs. In response to the deep impacts of COVID-19 on our communities, the admissions impact score heavily weighs COVID-19 data. Because the pandemic is exposing and exacerbating long existing inequities, we propose that over time, the weight of the COVID-19 specific criteria changes as the other criteria may increase, maintaining a system-wide priority for those who have been historically marginalized. We aim to support resilience for all through equitable policies.
Shout out to Cecilia from Territorial Empathy for putting together that beautiful work of art that perfectly captures what we're advocating for. And I now want to open it up to some questions. I saw a few coming through in the chat, but I want to pause for a moment to give folks the opportunity to throw more questions in the chat or to raise their hand and we can bring you off mute so you can share your thoughts, your feedback, or raise any questions that you may have.
Thank you, first of all, for this such a powerful, incredible presentation. I am so inspired by everyone who's spoken to today. The amount of depth of information, the quality of the data, the ability to display it in really easy to understand terms is incredible. So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for putting all this together. It's just inspiring. And I'm so glad this is being recorded. I can't wait to be able to share it with my community and continue to help get this word out. My question is, in terms of those who are not living in New York City, these people who are not there, is there other things that we can be doing? I live in Port Washington, Long Island. I would love to know what else people in my community can do to support what you are all up to, because I love what you're doing.
Okay, I saw someone from Baltimore early in the chat saying how similar a lot of the issues that are happening in New York City is where they are. And that's something I just want to highlight, is that some of these issues are specific to New York City, but the vast majority of them are not. Segregation in schools, segregation in housing, segregation in general exists across the country. And there are a lot of things that we can be doing to combat that. One of the big things that we talk about at IntegrateNYC is actually youth power and youth leadership. I think investing in the youth in your city or your town or your community, investing it in youth, investing in their power and their agency and their ability to advocate for themselves is one of the best things you can be doing, because it's not just a policy recommendation, although those are important. You know, it's not just about policy, it's about how to actually make the things sustainable by giving and helping people receive the tools that they need to make long-lasting change. So engaging in youth and investing in their growth and power. And that looks different for a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, but baseline, that's one.
Perfect, Leanne. Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Great, so Andrea, I'm gonna invite you to come off mute while we line some folks up to answer the questions in the chat.
Thank you. This is great. I was just thinking about how do we capture immigrants, and not only English language learners or multilingual learners, but also immigrant students that have parents that have limited English proficiency. As we saw, some of the students that speak some English and may not be qualified as English language learners, if their parents didn't have the English proficiency, if they didn't have the digital literacy, then they struggled just as much to be able to understand how to participate in these platforms. And I'm also wondering how, if there is a way to map out areas where there's high concentrations of undocumented immigrants, since particularly they were excluded from the COVID relief packages. And so they had some extreme economic struggles. And then lastly, I was also wondering how do the individual weights account for high levels of homelessness or students in temporary housing and foster care, since a lot of our immigrants and Black and Latinx youth are also in those spaces. So that's kind of my question. I know it's kind of broad.
That's a great question, Andrea. What a thoughtful question, and it's something that we think about because, as you know, even any effort to count undocumented folks like the census encounters some issues, right? I've done a lot of work in these communities, and folks are nervous to give their information out to people for good reason, given the political climate. What we've done and what we can try to do is try to approximate using different metrics and try to locate them. So essentially, we've looked at childhood poverty, we've looked at SNAP benefits, we've looked at all these different things. The maps actually have approximations of immigration by country of origin. So we also do this not only to try to find where undocumented folks live, but also to get more granularity when the data fails us. So for the Asian category, there's a movement that some of our community leaders are working on to disaggregate data, because Asian includes so much more than what we think of as Asian. It's a huge diaspora. And it's a similar example with the undocumented community. So there is no exact science. There's definitely ways to try to approximate that, and that's something that we built in. Besides the individual categories of students that are students in temporary housing, and they actually receive an individual priority, as well as the priorities that are baked into the model that include childhood poverty. we continue to work on ways to try to find the most vulnerable. And so we're happy to continue this conversation further. There's a feedback form at the bottom of the platform that we invite you all to kind of use for more ideas like that, because this is the information that we need. These are the folks that we want to find and make sure that the policy caters them, because those are the folks that can't always advocate for themselves. And to finish that, the last metric that we use to include these folks is an linguistic isolation score. That means folks that don't speak English. And we saw a very strong correlation between coronavirus cases and linguistic isolation in our city. So when it's the same reason that we see high mortality and morbidity in communities of color, folks just don't have the language and the tools, particularly during a pandemic when nurses and hospitals are short-staffed, to get an interpreter to advocate for their health concerns. So that is part of the reason that we built those categories into the model, but we're going to continue to do better, and we can continue that conversation in the future in later iterations of the policy.
Samantha Melgar's hand is raised. You want to come off mute?
Okay, hi guys. I'm from Long Island, so I'm from Westbury, Long Island, and my school is a minority school, and they like to pride themselves as diversity when we're really just Hispanic and Black students that really populate the entire school. So our own segregation that we see on Long Island, especially since we have like the redlining with Levittown and different school districts between Garden City and Hempstead, I just wanted to be involved with New York City because that's the one that more people have data on. And I just want to know from you guys who are part of this organization, what should I expect if I join the community? Are you guys just doing information stuff, or is there more lobbying for legislators to pay attention? Like, what should I expect?
Hi. I can answer that question. So previously to my work in New York Appleseed, I worked at Erase Racism, which is a nonprofit on Long Island that works on these issues as well. I don't know if you're familiar, and if you're not, I would definitely get connected because they do provide some data on basically showing how even though Long Island has been increasingly more and more diverse, it is also increasingly more and more segregated. Something that I dropped in the chat and multiple people had dropped is talking about using the 5 R's of real integration. And even though Long Island is somewhat of a different beast, right? Because you have a lot of segregation between districts versus in New York City, you have a lot of segregation within the districts. Those 5 R's of real integration and making sure that you're focusing on not just moving bodies, but the multifaceted approach that real integration seeks is something that we'll drop the link in the chat again so you can read up on the 5 R's. But I'd say that that framework I've seen both be applicable to work on Long Island and work on New York City. And that I think concludes how I can answer is those communities are so intertwined. So is there a place for you in thinking through what you are experiencing in the schools on Long Island within the conversation of New York City? Absolutely, because at the end of the day, those roots of systemic racism, systemic racism came from that same place, and then it sprouted its roots and created problems and cracks in different systems in different ways. But if we can understand the roots together, we'll be able to find solutions together as well to these really complex problems. I hope that gives you sort of a quick way of answering your question, but always happy to connect offline.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Naya, for holding it down. With about 4 or 5 minutes left, I see I have one more hand raised, Fielding Hung. And I think we've covered most of the questions that have been asked in the chat. People have been going hard in the chat, sending links, providing definitions, putting Instagram handles, all the things. But please continue to ask questions in the chat, and we'll close with Fielding.
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you all so much for all your hard work. This is amazing, and it's great to be here. One question I have is, what role do you think that money coming from things like PTAs and alumni associations play in, for example, specialized public high schools? Is that a significant portion of funding inequity in the city? And another question is, what do you all think is going to happen with New York City funding as rich parents make the choice to pull their students out of schools and increasingly remove resources that follow with those students? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So we got 2 questions on the table. What role do PTAs play in that funding inequity in segregated schools? And I'm gonna ask one of our youth leaders to come on or come off mute and talk about our resources of our 5R platform. And then also ask one of our youth leaders to serve as a fortune teller or a critical analyst, right? And predict, what do you expect will happen with public education, with folks pulling their kids out of the public system if they have the means to do so?
Really quickly, because I already answered a question, I don't want to take up too much space. I'd like to pose a prediction. Something that's been happening for a while now over the past few years is the privatization of education. And with the pandemic and the move from in-person to remote learning for the second semester, it has opened this door for a lot of people with this opportunity where public education is so vulnerable to pull from that and create their own private businesses and structures for education, which is harmful because public health education, and things that are the pillars and like foundations of communities are already not funded enough nationwide. So if we do start to see a very large increase in the privatization of education, that would be very bad for public education as it exists. And I hope that answered your second question. I'll leave it for someone else to answer the first one.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here, everyone. This is Matt. So on the PTA thing, yes, very much we see massive disparities. And I think what we understand is that because of the way that we do admissions in this city, we've created concentrations of the most privileged kids going to the most privileged schools, and the concentrations of the most vulnerable and marginalized students in other schools. And then we compare those schools together. So the way that PTA funds are distributed, utilized, super problematic. And Mark Traeger, chair of the city council, has done some really good work on thinking about how to manage and map and track some of that spending. So that's worth some looking into. On the other question about what's going to happen when the wealthy leave, one, that's been a pattern for many years and decades. It's been the opposite happening in New York City because of gentrification. I think from my perspective and from what we've always advocated for is whether or not there are rich people in a city should have nothing to do with how much we invest in our public education system. And so part of our mission is to ensure that we're creating policy not for those who have the privilege to leave, but actually those that don't have the privilege to leave. And so, that doesn't put us in a good position, but we need to hold accountable the governor of the state to ensure that we are funding our schools equitably, which we have not done for nearly 15 years. The mayor of the city to start taxing wealthier New Yorkers who are staying. And also we need to put some federal pressure on the federal government to actually start investing in and reinvesting in resources in response to COVID. And so we're gonna lose families, we're gonna lose people, but ultimately that doesn't take all the responsibility away from the system to actually serve our young people. And so we're gonna have to get creative and pull together. And I'm hopeful we have responses and ideas from our crew that can help think of better ways to do this.
All right, folks. So deeply grateful for everyone's participation today. We want to honor everyone's time. We know it's 2 p.m. We'll be sure to follow up by email with everybody who's able to attend with a video of today's meeting, as well as some links to actions that you can take. I'd encourage you to go onto Integrate's Instagram and Twitter to share the video about this impact score and start building some understanding in our communities about solutions. We appreciate all the depth of questions. And like Sakura said, this is a policy in process. It's built in community. And so this is part of a launch, but also a continuation. So we're excited to continue building with you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Carry each other forward, carry yourselves forward, and we look forward to building with you now and in the future.
We need an outro song. There we go. There we go. There we go.
Peace and power to the people. Power to the youth. Another plane I need innovation. Another plane I don't need vacation. Another plane I don't need vacation.